This is to document Bill and Dave's excellent adventure to the Arctic Ocean and Alaska. Our trip started in south central Colorado, then up into Canada, into the Arctic Circle to the Arctic Ocean, then across into Alaska, where we again went to the Arctic Circle, then over to Whittier, Alaska. Then we hugged the Alaska-Canadian border back to the U.S. and back to Colorado 37 days later. On our trip, we planned to cross into 8 states: Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. 4 Canadian territories: Alberta, British Columbia, Yukon, and Northwest. 2 Arctic Circles, one in the Canadian Yukon Territory and the other in Alaska, and 1 visit to the Arctic Ocean in the Northwest Territory, and have maybe 8 or 10 border crossings. We did many bucket list type accomplishments, so I'll go through those one by one. So the first was riding on the Alaska Highway. At Dawson Creek in British Columbia, you get to mile 0 of that. Then we headed up the Dempster Highway. This is a shot of me, selfie, at the Dempster Highway sign. And about halfway up the Dempster, you get to the Arctic Circle sign. This is me in front of it. And eventually we made it to Tuktoyaktuk, which is on the Arctic Ocean. You go about 3 more miles and you get to the Arctic Ocean sign. I was obliged to get completely submersed in the water.
Can't turn back now.
It's like 45 degrees. It's quite chilly. Then we went into Alaska via the top of the World Highway. So again, a selfie in front of the sign into Alaska. And eventually we headed up the Dalton Highway. That one we just wanted to go up to the Arctic Circle sign, so that's what we did. And on the way back down Alaska, we went to Denali National Park, and we rode, 15, 20 miles in there, as far as you can go. And later we got a rare, clear view of Denali the mountain. It's very unusual that there's not clouds covering the top of that. We headed down to Whittier, and we went through, to get to Whittier, you have to go through a 2.5 mile long train, car, motorcycle tunnel. It's really interesting. And you have to stay in between the rails the whole way. It's kind of dark. It was wet. It was reported that it was going to be really slippery in there, but we did not notice that. We also did the Denali Highway, which is kind of from Denali over across to St. Elias National Park. And while we were doing that, we ran across a bunch of people motorcyclists and non-motorcyclists, who said, wow, that's a bucket list item for me. I need to go along there. Now, me and my wife had done that 10 years ago in a rental car. Not supposed to do that. And it was really rough. It was much improved this time. And on the way, we did see a bald eagle, which was quite interesting. Then we went up to White Pass, which is almost to Skagway. And on the way back through Watson Lake, there's a thing called the Signpost Forest, which has got millions, I'll just say millions of signs. And I went in there armed with my own personal sign. So I found a spot for it, and I put that up there. And then the last thing we were going to do was hit Salmon Glacier, which is just outside of Hyder, Alaska. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do that because of a tire issue I had, which you'll find out about shortly. So here we left Dawson City, and we're just turning on to the Dempster. You can see it's kind of hazy with smoke. You can look at the sun there. This is in the morning, so we're riding right into it. First thing you do is you drive right past the Dempster Highway sign. Then you go over this old wooden bridge, which is pretty cool. And then you get about a mile or so of pavement, and then it is gravel the rest of the way. So riding the Dempster and getting to the Arctic Ocean was the highlight of our trip. So it's 550 miles each way, has only one way in or out. It's got about maybe a mile of pavement at the start. The rest is comprised of every type of surface and gravel ever dreamed of. There were several areas of road construction that were overly watered to create a 1 to 2 inch deep gravel mud calcium chloride soup, slippery as snot. Eagle Plains is a hotel gas stop that's about halfway up the Dempster. The Arctic Circle sign is about 25 miles past Eagle Plains. The further north you go, the looser the gravel and the more extreme the washboard. The last 50 miles to Tuktoyaktuk is a good old-fashioned loose gravel and washboard beatdown. For the entire route, the surface continually changed. There was no way getting used to a surface before it changed. Most notably, you'd be riding on some hard pack with minimal loose gravel and suddenly, without visual detection, change to 4-inch deep loose gravel. You'd have to guide your bike to another line on the road where there might be less gravel. This happened most frequently at corners where cars and trucks deviate from the standard right side line and move toward the inside line. The video on the GoPro did not do justice to the trucks and the amount of dust that they created as they went the opposite direction. Many times you couldn't even see the road directly below you, much less the side of the road or what was ahead of you. So you'd slow down to 5 miles an hour, hope that no one ran over you from the rear, and hope that no one was trying to pass the truck that would have a head-on with you. It was crazy. I recorded both ferries on the way back from Tuk, just so you could get an idea what they were all about. In spite of the challenges of the gravel, mud, hardpack, and washboard, neither of us had any close calls. And gravel that we thought was tough when we started was easy at the end. We were both very pleased to have ridden the Dempster and highly recommend others complete this challenge, but we both agreed that we don't ever need to do that again. Let's see, we had 4 issues during our trip. I'm going to talk about the first 2 were tire issues. Our rear tires cracked and we feared delamination, and my front tire delaminated. So we had chosen Moto Z Traction Air GPS front and rear, thinking these tires were going to go the full distance. That was wrong. We noticed cracks on the rear tires while evaluating wear at about 3,000 miles. The cracks grew when we finally decided we needed to do something at 6,000 miles or get stranded in the middle of nowhere. Now, this is not our tires, but this is what we saw. We saw very small cracks along the knobs, which continued to grow. They never grow quite to this point before we got them replaced, but we were fearful of that. And this is another photo that's not our tire, but this is what can happen when the cracks grow to the point where the tire delaminates. So we had to cancel a hotel in Haines and a ferry from Haines to Skagway and headed to Whitehorse to get the rear tires swapped. So mission was accomplished. Then we created a 400-mile day to hit some of what we'd missed which was namely White Pass between Skagway and into Canada. So we never saw an indication of trouble with the front tires until disaster struck mine, and it was halfway between Watson Lake, Yukon Territory, and Stewart, British Columbia, very isolated Highway 37. My front tire began to delaminate. That is, the tread lost adhesion to the air bladder in a local area. So this is a little map showing where we were, and there is no cell service other than 10 miles from each end. So we were just out there in the middle of nowhere. Very seldom saw any cars.
Right by the valve.
It's delaminating. I can't push it in there. I can push it in a little bit there, there.
Oh, it's all the way.
There.
Just the one lump,
And
then.
ends there. It's basically from there to there. And it feels hotter than there. I ended up using duct tape just to try to hold the tread on while we were riding, because it just seemed like it was just going to fly off, and who knows what might have happened. Oh, well, for the trip, I bought Good Sam roadside assistance. I called and they had me towed 200 miles to the city that I thought I had the best chance of getting a new tire. And it would have cost me $1,000, but it was 100% covered. I highly recommend Good Sam. So after I was all set up, Dave headed off, and the plan was for me to catch him in a day or two, because we didn't want to have to cancel all the hotels and then redo hotels. That would have just been a royal pain. A little while later in the day after Dave left, this dually truck and trailer showed up. We loaded the bike and off we went. We did have two other issues later. One, number 3 there, was Dave's front monoshock started leaking, so he finished the ride with an empty front shock. That was he probably did 5 days of riding with the leaking front shock, and nothing really too severe road-wise. And then the night before our last riding day, I came down with COVID. So I finished the ride, trailered home, and then tested positive. We had a 0-mile day in Dawson City, which is an old-timey town with dirt roads and wooden boardwalks. And it's really cool. Driving into Dawson City, we saw miles and miles of river rock piles, and it turns out that they are gold mining dredge tails. Once we found that out, we decided to take a tour of dredge number 4, which is the largest floating dredge in North America. So dredge number 4 has a collector end where buckets went down and pulled it up into the center. This is a floating dredge, by the way, and it pulls things into the rocks into the center. It sorts them out and dumps them out the back, and then the gold and smaller rocks fall down to the middle, and the middle section dumps out rocks and collects the gold. And this is our tour guide, and you can see that the gears inside are all rusty, and that's because this dredge actually sank in like 1959, and they recovered it and they're restoring it. So just because of its historic ties. I had 2 personal ties to dredge number 4. It was designed and manufactured by Marion Steel Shovel Company, and I lived in Marion, Ohio in the 70s, and was very familiar with the company before it closed. Also, I had ridden the White Pass Railroad, on which most of the dredge was transported, and I also knew why the biggest of the gears had to find alternate transportation. Yes, too big for the train tunnels. On our way back from the dredge tour, we went up this road called Dome Road, and we weren't really sure what to expect, but we knew it went up to the top of this big hill. And from Dome Road, we could see all of Dawson City, and we could also kind of look up and see where dredge number 4 was actually located. This is the first time I've captured a bug splattering on the GoPro lens. I turned on the GoPro when I saw a brown shape on the road. Turned out it wasn't a moose. This is the Columbia Ice Field in Jasper National Park. It's the largest ice field in North America, Rocky Mountains. This group of 10 to 15 caribou are really hard to see. I barely got the GoPro on in time to catch this bear. These bison are just chilling beside the road. Trust me, there is a moose here. I got another bear on video. The stop Jeep really helped a lot. Here I spotted a fox and was able to get it on video. This bear was just eating vegetation on the side of the road. The sun was blinding at times. It's difficult to see these cows. There were too many instances to count where we waited for a pilot car to guide us through the construction. A typical warning: construction ahead, motorcyclists beware, there may be loose gravel ahead. Sometimes the gravel went on for tens of miles. The second puddle was especially deep. Several places on the Dempster and here on the Dalton, they grade up the dirt and add calcium chloride water to make yuck soup. I used an app on my iPhone called Locate a Web to let people at home who were interested know where I was throughout my journey. So every day I would create a little track, and my iPhone would track that, and anytime my iPhone would get a signal, a cell signal, it would transmit that to the web, and the people who opened the link that I sent them could see exactly where I was, how fast I was going, how far I'd gone. It worked really well. I think one day it didn't work. I'm not sure what the problem was. It typically requires a Wi-Fi or cell signal when you start and a Wi-Fi or cell signal when you end. And in between, it just records the data on the phone from its GPS. And then as it gets a cell signal, it sends it to the web. So it works really well. I highly recommend it. A little border crossing comedy. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was a border crossing I experienced going into Canada. It was at White Pass near Skagway, Alaska. We'd ridden from Canada and just crossed the border without going into Skagway and short of the U.S. Customs and made a U-turn. I went first through Canadian Customs. She asked the usual questions like, where are you from? Where are you going? How long in Canada? Do you have any cannabis? Then things got weird. She asked me if I had a gun. No. Do you have a club? No. Do you have a pocket knife? No. Do you have nunchucks? What? She repeated, do you have nunchucks? That's when I think she saw me roll my eyes as I said no. And she says, how do you defend yourself? I said, bear spray? And then she changed the subject. Do you know the guy behind you? Yes. What's he to you? A friend. Okay, go ahead and park over there and wait for him. So then Dave pulls up. Later he asked me if I'd told her he was a convict, as he was also given the third degree. But he's a U.S. green card holder, and he's more used to the extra scrutiny. He could hear via my Mycena what I was being asked, and we both cracked up over and over the rest of the trip regarding nunchucks. And apparently nunchucks are illegal to possess in Canada, so maybe she was trying to trip me up. I don't know, but it just seemed really strange. Our trip was 37 bike days, including 3 0-mile days. I had 2 trailer days, to Colorado and back from Texas, about 600 miles each way. Our total riding distance from Colorado was 10,500 miles. My bike got 51.2 miles per gallon on average. I paid on average $5.75 a gallon, the highest price being $7.50 a gallon. We stayed exclusively at hotels, averaging $105 per night. I happily applied this sticker to my bike.